One small step for man.
So that's our new intro music. We got intro music now. Okay. Welcome back to 11 Named People, the show about football inspired by something the Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm once wrote. The imagined community of millions seem more real as a team of 11 named people. I'm Sean Jacobs, and with me is Tony Karen. That's the man with the hat. He's obviously prepping himself for something tomorrow. Oh, there, I see the sign. Okay. So we're recording this week before competitive club football returns in much of the world, especially in Europe, where most of the world's best footballers play. And we have a couple of things to talk about in this episode, including especially all the fuss in European football about the preseason, which ends today. Tony's already laughing at this topic, but we're going to talk about it. But we're going to start somewhere this week. We have to start somewhere with there's a bunch of stuff that happened this week that caught our eye. So we'll just go through some of them. This week was the 19th anniversary of the death of Marc Vivien Foe. I don't know if people can remember him. He played for, at the time, I think he was playing for Man City. And he had also played before that, I think for Lyon and for West Ham. And it was the Confederations Cup, which I don't know if people remember what that was. That's the tournament that's played like the year before the World Cup. So it's like the different continental champions. I can't even remember who else was there, but I know that Colombia was there for South America. Cameroon was the defending African champions. France, because they had won that was before the World Cup, actually, the World Cup before the 98. What World Cup was this? 2003. So that's 2004. They were playing in France, interestingly, and not in Korea, Japan, because remember the 2010 one? They actually played in South Africa in 2009. But anyway,
yeah, they normally do play.
That's a weird choice. I was thrown off by that. So anyway, it's a Confederations Cup semifinal, and Colombia was playing against Cameroon, and suddenly on the halfway line, Marc Vivien Foe basically collapsed. He just kind of he fell down, and so he died. He was taken to the hospital, but it was too late. So this week, it being the anniversary, and I just want to put up this tweet. The historian Christoph Vogel, who studies Congo, he tweeted on July 28th. Actually, I'm putting up the wrong image. He tweeted on July 28th that where is it? There it is. That people are rightfully praising Christian Eriksen, but there's not enough talk anymore on the great footballer that Marc Vivien Foe was. And then he linked to that article that I put up that came from Africa Report, which is an English language, London-based magazine, I think London and Paris-based magazine. And they ran a piece on how what's his name? Roger Milla remembered like the events of that day and how terrible and sad it was. But I wasn't sure what he meant by that people don't talk as much about what a great footballer Marc Vivien Foe was. I mean, I was actually thinking, I know Tony wanted to say something about this, but when I was thinking about it, so Marc Vivien Foe was probably the first major footballer who collapsed on a field and then sadly died. But there were, interestingly, mostly other African footballers of African descent. First, there was Kanu, I think, around that same time or a year later. He had played for Inter. He was he was about to sign a contract with Arsenal. If you remember Kanu, in the mid-90s, he played in that great Ajax team, right, that won the Champions League. So he's about to go to Arsenal when they find that there was something wrong with his heart, and so he had to stop playing. He had an operation, and I think he was out of football for at least 1 year, and then he came back and he played football again. So it's an interesting story about Marc Vivien Foe. Sadly, passed away, but then there's another story in which Kanu actually played and then did really well with Arsenal. He became like a legend at Arsenal. And then the second other story is that of Khalidou Fadiga. You reminded me that in the 2002 World Cup, he scored this like brilliant back heel against Sweden. That's a great Senegal.
He set it up. The goal was actually scored by
who scored that?
Henri Camara, but yeah.
Yeah, Henri Camara. Oh my God, sort of bald-headed, right? Or short haircut.
Yeah.
So then
Fadiga's back heel just changes the shape of the whole field. Like, it's an extraordinary moment.
Right, but he had a similar. He was coming from Inter also. I don't know what is it with Inter and their health setup. They discovered also that he had heart problems while he was there. So then he was released with that heart problem. And he was, he decided he wanted to continue playing football. So he went to play at Bolton in England. And they find that he had an irregular heartbeat. He also had treatment. They had told him that if he played in the game, somebody knocked him against his chest, that he could die like instantly. But he did have another medical. He got back to football, and he played, I think, for Coventry City, and then eventually he went back and played in Belgium, and he retired. I mean, the long sort of setup to this is like the comment in that tweet was about, of course, Christian Eriksen, right? Who, as we know, he collapsed in the Euros last summer into 20. Was it this summer, right? I'm getting old. Last summer, yeah, he collapsed on the field, and he seemed to have made an incredible recovery. And he's back, and I think he's now joining Man United. He's now joining Manchester United. He played one season with Brentford. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of that tweet either. Obviously, we care about African football. We talk about Marc Vivien Foe. We'll talk about Khalidou Fadiga. I don't think it's, I mean, as he says, rightly praising Christian Eriksen. I do think that the reason that Christian Eriksen moment is so stuck in a lot of people's minds is like, basically, it's in a major international competitive tournament. The Confederations Cup is not a serious tournament. And, you have millions of people around the world watching this moment in real time where Eriksen collapses and literally his heart stops. And the players actually save him. His teammates, quick action, to both, I don't know, I can't remember the detail, but this is all happening in a live game. We're all watching, we're texting one another. It's like, can you see what's happening? Like, wow, this is so wild. Like, it was this dramatic moment that was being streamed in real time around the world. And, everybody, had this, there's always been a feel-good factor around Eriksen ever since. And just as this expression of solidarity and care for players and so on. And you remember last year when he was playing for Brentford and he flew into a tackle and
I remember
the team. And the guy turned around ready to hit him and saw who it was and then just hugged him.
Like backed off, yeah. Like I remember.
But actually hugged him. It was kind of like, oh, it's you.
Well, I think the one player that the one story, and this goes back to kind of this. There's not a long history, but there seems to be a visible history of African players kind of having these kind of heart problems. The other case, which also was dramatic and happened in a match. So the ones I sort of brought up, the ones I brought up is like players who are being told in a kind of a medical, you got an issue, you can't play. So it's not like, you're right, it's not like as dramatic as what you're describing. But I think the one other case that comes close to this is Fabrice Muamba, who I think he was playing for Bolton at the time, and which our great friend Benny. No, he didn't play there. Benny played at
JJ Okocha played for Bolton.
JJ Okocha, yes. Thanks for that correction. JJ Okocha, the great JJ Okocha played there. But anyway, he played there. Fabrice Muamba's family's from Congo, I think refugees, against Tottenham. And he suffered cardiac arrest during a game. And they said that his heart, I remember the time reading that his heart stopped for almost, I think it was more than like an hour, that he was basically dead. He recovered, but he was basically told he couldn't play football again. So, Ericsson seems to be, if it's that kind of story, I think it's an incredible story. And I think that's why people are sort of drawn to it. But added to that,
I mean, as you say, like the one thing we should think about when it's a player from an African country, for that player to give up football is going to affect the livelihoods of hundreds of people,
right?
Who are depending, whole communities that are depending on that player's earning capacity, to just help them make it through, whatever they're going through, and the stakes are higher in a Scandinavian social democracy. If Ericsson had to give up football, he's taken care of and his community's taken care of. That's not necessarily the case for a player from Senegal or Congo.
So let's go on to the next one. The next thing that also like we sort of caught our eye was, and I know you followed this more than I did, was Fenerbahce fans chanting Vladimir Putin's name in a Champions League game against Dynamo Kiev. That was also this week, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where this is not what this actually reminded me of was there was a it wasn't a friendly. It was I think it might have even been an under-21 game in, I don't know, it was like 2003 or so, like the arch derby rivalry, right? United States versus Mexico, like back in the early zeros. So it must have been 2003 or 2002.
It was so competitive.
It was a proper competitive grudge match, right? And to wind the US fans up, what are the Mexican fans chanting? Osama bin Laden's name. Now, does that mean they support Osama bin Laden? No, it's just like, it's, part of that. I mean, that's an ugly thing. It's like whoever, your enemy hates, you will, and fears most, you will chant. I mean, it's like incredibly stupid behavior. It's not, I mean, I doubt the Fenerbahce fans support Vladimir Putin. But
yeah, I think I saw somebody from the club said that the fans, with the player who scored for Dynamo Kiev, he made some sign, or like his celebration was he made like a gesture with his hand that is a reference to Besiktas. So they got sort of mad at that, and they didn't like that. So it wasn't necessarily that they are supporting Vladimir Putin. I do think it's interesting that, of course, we are not. I'm just stating my position outright. I'm against the invasion of sovereign states and aggressive wars of aggression.
Whoever does it,
whoever's watching this, whenever they watch this, you're not getting from me like some rationalization for Vladimir Putin's kind of behavior or Russia's behavior.
Yeah,
historically.
Any nonsense about Vladimir Putin being anti-imperialist?
Yeah, you're not getting.
Yeah, as good as anti-imperialist as Tsar Nicholas II.
Yeah, if you look at the history of like Ukraine's history within the Soviet Union as as one of the republics, the Soviet republics, and its relationship with liberation movements, whether they were in Africa, Asia, or South America or Latin America, Ukraine was the place where people went to study. I mean, just on we know South Africa, best. ANC cadres or whatever went to study either engineering or some form of warcraft. You ended up in the Ukraine mostly. So it's like this sort of the way that the Russia-Ukraine thing is told. Putin himself, as we know, he wasn't a fan of the Soviet Union, but now he's taken. So anyway, so I don't want to belabor that point, except to what I'm trying to say is I think it's interesting that the one comment that one of the Turkish football officials made was, we don't want politics to mix with football. That was their comment. That's sort of the point I'm trying to drive at is it's a little silly point, because if you were watching any top European league game last season, it's very clear that you could make lots of political statements about Ukraine and you could make political statements that were pro-Ukraine and nobody had a problem with that. So we know that this had nothing to do actually with Putin. It had, or with Russia. It was just
Well,
sort of
what
finding.
what I'm laughing at there is that the Fenerbahce guys sort of would have us believe that their rivalry with Besiktas isn't political. It's like Besiktas is the team of the anarchists and of the left and of the Armenians.
And all the top class football in Turkey is about it.
It's completely political, right? I once
Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, those are about different sides of the.
When I was at Time magazine once, I had occasion to be part of a group that was interviewing Erdogan, and I actually cracked because he's got his very sort of game-faced, stern, angry man thing, and I actually managed to make him laugh despite himself because it was the week of Marvi Marmara. No, sorry. It wasn't. Marvi Marmara had happened about a year before. Remember when Israel sank the Turkish aid vessel?
Right.
It was going to Gaza, right? So Erdogan, very correctly, was challenging Israel over its behavior and was really angry with the Israelis and so on. So 3 days before we interviewed him, there'd been a Europa League game, and Besiktas had beaten Maccabi Tel Aviv 5-1. So I said to Erdogan, Mr. Prime Minister, I know you're, because at that stage he was, I know you're a Fenerbahce fan, but could you comment on Besiktas' result this week in the Europa League? And he tried to hold his thing and he just backed up laughing.
He couldn't prevent himself.
He was because he hates Besiktas, but he hates, but they beat the Israelis, so he had to.
I mean, but this is the one little piece I just want to add to that is there's a club that I think he got involved in. I think his brother-in-law runs it.
Istanbul Basaksehir or something.
Yeah, and then they went to the Champions League, I think, in 2020. So, and a lot of if people want to Google this, a lot of the reporting on it is clear that this club is sort of an extension of the AKP, the AKP, of his party. It's in a sort of extension of his own sort of political. It's like the club of Turkey. So it's this idea coming from the Turkish side to say, we don't want to take any responsibility for these fans because we believe that football and politics should not mix. It's not proven by any of the experience of football in Turkey. And as I was trying to say, is it the Bosphorus, right? That runs between the two different sides of the city. So you got sort of Galatasaray on the one side, Fenerbahce on the other side, representing different sort of class segments within the city. So it's not this idea of kind of saying hey, there's no politics when people shout slogans. It's also.
Yeah, of course. I mean, your political affiliation and your football affiliation in Istanbul, like most other European cities, are very closely aligned. Galatasaray was the team of the secularists, and Fenerbahce, at least in the early, for a period before they created this new club, had the support of the AK people, and Besiktas was the left opposition. I mean, it was yes, it's not as simple as that ever, but broad brush.
I'm assuming you're trying to say Besiktas is the club we should be supporting.
No, I mean, of course, yes.
One of just on that sort of obscure football stuff.
So which hat am I wearing?
You're wearing a Liverpool hat.
Whenever I meet Besiktas fans, I have to apologize for Peter Crouch's bicycle kick. You remember?
Yeah. But anyway, I was just going to mention in passing that Fani Medida, one of my favorite footballers, kind of the early 90s from South Africa, he played for Jomo's team, for Jomo Cosmos. He actually ended up at Besiktas. He had a pretty decent career there. Anyway, staying with this kind of connection between you can't mix sports and politics, we always got to talk about Palestine and Israel. It was going to go there.
Yeah.
So if obviously people noticed, or if you didn't, a Palestinian footballer who played for the Israeli national team, probably going to mangle his name, Munas Dabur. So the one part there, which I hope we can unpack just slightly, he played for the Israeli national team, and some of the reporting he's being described as an Israeli Arab. So a year ago, he criticized the Israeli army for attacks that they were, on civilians in Jerusalem. And I think one of the people that got injured was his uncle. So as a result of that, since then, he openly criticized the army. I think in social media posts, he was heckled by fans for saying, for his criticism. And so this week he went on Instagram and he posted in I think in Hebrew, Arabic, and in English that he was no longer going to represent the Israeli national team. I think it's an interesting moment. I'd like to hear your take on this. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was there was one comment on Haaretz, and let me put this on the screen, the story. But there was a story on Haaretz. There we go. There was a story on Haaretz by a journalist in the comments. So in the comments of this particular story, one of the readers said, "Oh, people overreacted because we need this guy in our PR struggle over the occupation, and we have lost this guy." I thought if that's your best response to the fact of kind of military aggression against regular people going about their daily business, to say, "Hey, we went too hard against him for criticizing that, so we've now lost him for our PR effort." I think that's quite quite a telling comment.
Right. So we know Israel is an apartheid state. All of the major, even Israeli human rights organizations have made that conclusion based not only on the population and the way the population under occupation is treated, but also based on how the population of Palestinians who are within the 48 borders, i.e. what the Israelis call Israeli Arabs, but which a community that tends to identify itself rather as Palestinian citizens of Israel. Now, the Israeli Football Association is obviously always, a lot of these players are very skillful, and they've always had a couple of Palestinian players in the Israeli national team from inside the 48 borders. But and that they're telling the world, "Oh, this is a democratic state of all its citizens," except that basically Israel is not a democratic state of all its citizens. It is increasingly open about the fact that Palestinians have second-class citizenship if they're in 48, and they have no citizenship, apartheid style, if they're under occupation. But they're the same people. They just were, arbitrarily.
The best analogy for me when I was reading it, I was thinking of sort of somebody like Edel Tobias playing rugby for South Africa in 1981 in New Zealand. It's that type of setup. Or Omar Henry. I don't know if you remember Omar Henry.
Yeah, like the white regime using.
He played for South African players to show that. Yeah, so it's
sports washing reasons.
Yeah, it's basically sports washing,
but basically but what's happened in Israel is that because the US has just completely enabled the worst apartheid excesses and does absolutely nothing. They shoot dead one of my colleagues, a sniper shoots her in the head, right? Absolutely no question of what happened. The US is like, "Well, we don't know, we think it was this, but it was definitely an accident." And it's like, if you're an American and Israel kills you, forget about ever getting justice or accountability. That is not going to happen. And it's racism. It's bluntly racism. And so, essentially, the Israelis don't care anymore. So they have their nation state law that literally, essentially, basically, they make clear that this is not, that to Palestinians, you don't really belong here. That essentially they would like to expel the remaining Palestinian population if they could. Those statements that Dabur made during the last year were basically when there were pogroms. Jewish right-wingers were waging pogroms against Palestinians living inside Israeli towns, and the police was stepping aside, enabling them. The police were attacking Palestinians themselves, and he was like, "This is my community, and we are under attack." And basically, he's criticizing, the state for doing that, and it's untenable for him to represent Israel. So the other analogy might be, in many ways, for Rashid Makhloufi and the other Algerian players who were playing for France under colonization, who basically were like, no, and they went away to play for the FLN. But I do think there's an interesting challenge here. because
I was going to say, before you make your challenge, because you have to at least make that clear for people. So this is like a team of footballers playing in the French leagues who then decide to withdraw from playing in the professional league in France, go back
the French national team,
and including
the 58 World Cup.
yeah, and going back and during a war and saying we're going to represent this country in the making. We are going to go tour around Yugoslavia, particularly in the Eastern Bloc. And I think, did they tour in South America? I don't remember.
I don't think so. No, there was not.
The whole point was to sort of, it was kind of like to create, like, if you imagine there's a BDS squad.
Yeah.
That's playing for Palestine. But the only difference here is there is already a country, there's already apparently a country called Palestine, and it plays in FIFA. It plays actual matches within FIFA, and it plays in Asia. So there's an interesting thing here, which I'm hoping I think that's where you're going with this, that you had something where a country was in the making, and in this case, there is a country already playing in FIFA.
Well, this is the thing. So this is
and this can Munas Dabur now move and go play for Palestine?
But more importantly, this is FIFA has essentially already codified what we might call the two-state solution, i.e. that basically the answer to Israeli apartheid is to create a separate Palestinian state. Now, that might have been the organizing principle of the Palestinian national movement 30 years ago. It's really not the case anymore. That national movement is completely discredited at this point, like Fatah and the PLO, and I mean, Mahmoud Abbas is basically an extension of the occupation. He's a gendarme for the Israelis, essentially, and the Americans, and
kind of like a Buthelezi, but
exactly like a homeland leader in South Africa.
Yeah.
And so, but
he's at best. I know I don't want to cut in, but at best he's like an Enos Mabuza of Kangwane. But not even. But basically, what more and more young Palestinians are realizing and advocating for, and also Palestinians who live inside the 48 boundaries, is that the solution to Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism is a democratic state for everyone, right? So you're talking about like justice and equality, not two states. Essentially that the Israelis have ensured that there's no ways it's going to be divided into two countries. Not viable. It's one country, whatever the political system look like. The response to that, I think what you're suggesting is that the response to that then becomes the struggle for one country.
In a way, for democratic equality.
And so then, what is the challenge, I suppose, for the sports movement around that? Which I want to get to the last, just a related item to this before we move on. So also this week, Morocco and Israel signed like a legal agreement. I think apparently it's the first legal agreement between the two countries. And if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, as part of like an accord between the two countries, between Israel and a bunch of Arab countries, supported by Donald Trump, was pushing for this agreement. The Trump administration recognized Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara, and I think in a way Morocco sort of said we'll stay out of the question of Palestine for now. And they signed a number of agreements. Some of them, which I think is interesting, the language which I read in a French newspaper was the sharing of expertise and the modernization of judicial systems through digitization. I find these kind of language very interesting, as well as to fight together against organized crime, terrorism, and human traffic. So you can hear the kind of the signaling in that language. But the thing that I thought was interesting, there was some tweets, and I couldn't see it being confirmed, that there was also agreements around sports. So there was talk about scheduling a friendly football match between Morocco and Israel, which I think would be, for the Israeli PR, that would be a coup. If they pull that off, that will be a coup. But it's at the same time as that news was coming out, BDS announce this. Then they announced they just said that there were these Juventus, Atletico Madrid, AS Roma, Tottenham, Paris Saint-Germain, and Nantes were planning matches in Israel, and that Uruguay was planning to train there for the ahead of the World Cup, and that the Israeli national team will play a match with Spain. And so BDS was sending out this notice about, I think it's 8 clubs in Palestine had written letters that they wanted people to sign on to ask for these games to be called up. Wow. So there's a lot of movement. Yeah, I mean, of course, the point that I find interesting was that finally it seems that BDS was now really getting into sports, because remember
you and Aubrey wrote that piece in the Nation 5 years ago.
Yeah. Like, hey, come on,
get your act together.
Get your act together on this, and finally see something on this. It's an interesting moment. Yeah.
But just on that, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and you would think in this moment where FIFA acted so quickly on Ukraine to ban Russia, and yet Israel has been violating international law and violating FIFA's own statutes for years, and no action is being taken. It's managing to sidestep all that action. But you would think, like, you wonder if the BDS people are going to enlist the support of, say, Lionel Messi, who managed to convince his teammates a couple of years, in 2018. Argentina was supposed to play a friendly in Israel, and Messi convinced the dressing room to say no, and they pulled out. And you would think, like, Uruguay, I mean, basically, Messi and Suarez are best friends. You would think, like,
although isn't, I think Suarez is kind of on his way out. The interesting thing about Uruguay is Uruguay had a fairly decent left-wing government until recently, and the president that drove around in the Beetle and who was involved in the armed struggle in Uruguay, but then I think his term was up, so they've elected a much more kind of centrist figure. So I thought it was interesting again that you have this kind of it seems Uruguay and Argentina mostly seem to want to keep wanting to play in Israel. It's just a bizarre clamoring for this.
Well, I don't think it's that they want to so much as that the Israelis recruit them.
Totally. I mean, I understand, even if it's bad politics, I understand that these European teams are playing there. They're playing Israelis in UEFA.
Yeah.
They play in UEFA competitions anyway.
Okay, here's a question very few people know. When did Israel become part of UEFA?
I know that answer. It's mid-90s. It's like
1994. So it's after the Oslo Accords. It's almost like what happened with South Africa and, like getting reintegrated into world sport was that, like, somebody threw the Israelis, a concession. It's like, okay, you seem to be, like, doing the right thing now, so we'll let you play your football in UEFA, so everybody won't boycott you.
But except you have to play in, like, some of the games are not always played in Israel, right?
Well, it depends sometimes on the security situation.
They played somewhere else, yeah.
Tottenham Hotspur offer the ground.
Oh, for Israel?
They did, yeah. In 2008, I think it was. Like, there was some time where there was, like, rockets flying, and Spurs offered Israel, like, to play a home game in
games there. Wow.
White Hart Lane, yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna watch this. We'll watch and see whether this has any effect on these games being played. In the end, a lot of these teams, they play there anyway.
Yeah.
Don't so much about it, but they do play there. But it will be interesting to see if this game gets stopped. Anyway, let's get to that other topic we wanted to talk about, which is, like I said at the beginning, we do definitely want to talk about the fuss about the preseason.
Yeah, because I'm coming to you live from the training camp in Austria.
In Salzburg.
The trees.
But aren't you like but you suppose I think you're somewhere in Leicester aren't you like in Leicester, because tomorrow you gotta be ready for your
No, I'll watch that on my computer.
Because but if you're at the camp right now in Salzburg, then you're on your way to Leicester, which is another interesting thing. They're not playing this Charity Shield. The English season opens with the Charity Shield, and they normally play it at Wembley, but they have to play it in Leicester because it's the final of the Euro Euros for women tomorrow between France. Sorry, I said France. That's probably how you said it's a bit of a slip. England against Germany. But we'll talk about that next week because I have some of my own arguments these days.
You want to talk about the charity shields?
I want to say, let me talk quickly about let's talk quickly about the preseason. And no, this is not going to be about players' form, so relax. It's just like there's all this chatter about the preseason. I think Tottenham apparently won a cup in Asia, and people were joking that finally Tottenham has some silverware. As usual, Arsenal is undefeated in the preseason. They beat Chelsea 4-0 in some friendly in the US, and like crazy hot weather where there was like a million drink breaks. But it's my point really is here the Arsenal fans who can always get excited for anything. They now think they're gonna do really well this season because they're undefeated in the preseason.
I hope Arsenal knocks Chelsea out of the top 4. I will say that.
So wait, before we just on a side note, are we at this point where we now think that Chelsea is worse than Arsenal?
By what measure?
Is it like in moral terms or something that you're saying? I hope Chelsea.
No, it's more sentimental. There were times that I was living in London briefly, and I'd go and watch Arsenal standing on the North Bank. So I've always had a bit of a soft spot for them. I mean, in moral terms, between
Rwanda and the other. Well, the other one is not owned by the oligarch anymore. So,
no, it's owned by the oligarch and then bought by some US sports guy who doesn't seem to understand much about
football much. Yeah, at least the oligarch understood football.
But also, I find Tuchel very annoying. Tuchel to me feels like a sort of princeling, like a child who was raised, I mean, listen, I know nothing about his background, so let me not say, but he just seems very like a spoiled kid who's sort of
or sort of like very kind of like almost like an accountant. Well, sorry, bless the accountants. I'm not trying to say there's something wrong with accountants, but somebody who's there isn't much charisma there. Like there's a video doing the rounds that he played table tennis with Raheem Sterling. It's like a short little video that you can find on YouTube, and I think Chelsea fans are sharing it to kind of show, look how human and fun Tuchel is.
But also, hey, there's one other thing. As much as there are one or two Chelsea fans that I consider to be.
I know where you're going with this one. I know you guys
from Joe Slovo to my friend Chris Taylor at the Guardian. But that said, like the Chelsea fans.
Weah played there. George Weah played for Chelsea.
Yeah. But I'm saying, remember that video in Paris? The Chelsea fans. There are many, there's a very strong racist current among the Chelsea fans. I don't think you find that among the Arsenal fans.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, this is a topic for another day, but it's fascinating. If Arsenal has visited Rwanda on the armband and kind of basically doing free advertising for like an authoritarian state, on the other, if you look at like this Arsenal in popular culture, the fans. If you go online and you watch these kind of fan TV type videos on YouTube, Arsenal is probably the most multiracial is a cheap word, but it's like the most multiracial team on social media. It's a very Black African kind of fan base, or all those AFTV type setups. Most of the other clubs, including Liverpool, it's still a kind of idea of the club that often dates back to. That doesn't, I think, gel anymore with the reality of how global these clubs have become.
Right.
That, you have a kid who's living, I don't know, in Liverpool or Barcelona or Paris, who's a Liverpool fan, and they don't necessarily live in Liverpool anymore. Whereas with a lot of those podcasts from those other clubs, there's an insistence on the sort of like local identities for these presenters. With Arsenal, I think it's like way more open that this is a global club. This is a club for London. London is a multicultural city. It's a different approach.
When Kagame complains about how they're playing, then people take notice.
I think people just take notice because there's like, Kagame. Like, I don't know. People are just wondering, like, why is he talking about football? But in any case, let me just finish the setup here. So Tottenham has finally won something. Arsenal's going through their usual, oh, look at us, we're undefeated during the preseason. Chelsea lost on penalties to something, to a team called Charlotte FC. Everton lost to Minnesota United. And Barcelona and Real Madrid played in something called a Clásico, or they are going to play a Clásico in Las Vegas. So there's all these, like, you know, this idea that these teams go to on the summer tours. And they also now mostly go to two places. They mostly go to like Asia in the beginning part. And then all the action shifts to the US. So like about like say 2-3 weeks ago, you had like Liverpool play Man United. I think it was in Thailand. You had, you know, there were some games in Singapore, in South Korea. There was this like crazy game. Just look at the video if you can find it online, where Tottenham played an all-star team of South Korea. And it's basically like a homecoming party for Son. So, you know, it's like they're definitely PSG's in Japan, and in the US you got Arsenal, Juventus, Everton, Chelsea, Barcelona, Real Madrid. You know, they're all in the US and they're all playing in this, I think it's called the International Challenge Cup. And to make a long story short, you know, it's in the heat. It's like, it's quite hot. Like if you look at the videos, players are sweating. Everybody's talking about how hot it is. It's far, like there's a lot of flying involved. In the past, Liverpool would just go to Germany, go to Austria, whatever, and, you know, play some games back in another city in the UK. But now it seems it's become normal for these clubs to like leave, travel halfway around the world, particularly to Asia, or travel to the US 8, 7, 8, 9 hours, 10 hours to go play in these tournaments like in the heat. And so everybody's like, why are they doing this? And when they do this, it's not like they're playing full strength. You know, the commentators are going all crazy and the fans get all worked up. But it's kind of meaningless. Like it doesn't amount to much. And so I think the big question is just, why are they doing this? If you don't watch all the fan channels where people are talking about, look at the form of Gabriel Jesus, there's something else going on here. And I mean, of course, you know, it's definitely about business. I mean, this is about business. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, like we've known that for years, that like the preseason is about your brand and about making money. And like the players know that the players have to go through this hectic. I don't think it helps they're getting their bodies prepared for a season of football to be flying around, you know, to all these locations they don't get.
Just on that, by the way, I saw a thing that I think it was Real Madrid. One of the teams flew to was playing in LA, and then they had like another game, almost like on the other side of the US, in Green Bay in Wisconsin. So there's these like vast distances that it's not like you're taking a train or you find like a small plane in the UK or Spain or whatever. No, these like vast distances that these players, like for a game like in the same week.
No, I mean, so I think from a footballing point of view, that those games tell us next to nothing. I mean, you know, we were mocking all the other fans. We should also mock the Liverpool fans who were complaining about a goal drought from Darwin Nunez because he didn't score in his first 3.
Easy. Andy Carroll, Mark.
No, it's just like mad. It's like, you know, just take the summer off, man. Don't pay any attention to this stuff. We'll give Nunez a year.
As I told you earlier, I kind of like, the only thing that I like about the preseason was watching Carvalho. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Fabio Carvalho. I like seeing what he could do. But I'm excited by this. But yeah.
What I do think is interesting, though, what I find quite fascinating is they go and play this midsummer nonsense fixture in a stadium in Minnesota. They get 80,000 fans.
Oh, it's crazy.
80,000 fans that are paying. I think you told me what the ticket prices were.
Something like 250, 300. I think and I read another number for Singapore, Thailand. It was also something like $100, $150, which is not it's not like something local people have lying around.
Right, but so like if you take those US figures, I mean, this almost harkens back to the 1920s in America, where Real Madrid would come and play at like the horse racing stadium in New York City and get at that 25,000 people. There's like a hidden prehistory of US soccer before World War II, But I think just because of a conversation you and I were having the other day, I noticed that two players from Serie A at the top of their game, right? One's 28 and one's 30, have gone and signed for. One of them was Insigne, I think,
Yeah.
from Napoli, who Liverpool were looking at a while ago, have gone and signed for the Toronto MLS team. And I'm like, what is going on in the MLS? Like, how are they getting the money to sign European players who are not ready to retire, which is when most players come here? And then I went and looked at the TV deal. So the Premier League TV deal is 2.5 billion for 3 years, right? The MLS deal is $2 billion for 6 years. Now, yes, okay, so that's that's half of the that's half of the value, or less than half. It might be only a third of the value, but that's a huge jump from where it was a few years ago. It tells you that actually there's a real mass market for football in the United States, and also that sense of plugging in football here with global football, with global club football.
And also, it's easy. It's so just on the money, I think I read a number in The Athletic saying that, so just on the money, and then I'll get to the point about it being easy to plug in your, the Athletic, I think, said that Man United or Real Madrid, they can make up to £2 million per game. And that some major league teams will offer you $500,000 to play against a mid-range Premier League club. So that's probably Everton,
Crystal Palace, yeah.
Yeah, Crystal Palace is playing out in the US. So there's definitely money for those clubs, for the brand. You can, if you saturate the brand in Europe, then there are all these fans that are out somewhere out outside of Europe. And I think the other quote I read on the BBC, where one of Liverpool's officials said that Asia is Liverpool's single largest region in terms of fan base. I mean, so this is, like you said, this is not about even looking to see how people are playing together. Or Klopp, I think, complained about this in an interview. He was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. But at the same time, he understands that this is about how the club is going to making money. And we were joking before we came on air, if you and I don't watch those Liverpool TV or Man United TV, but if you're 10 years old or 12 years old, you're going to watch those kind of channels. So that channel works with those fans that are not at home base, that is somewhere else in the world. And to the US issue, the US, I mean, is this place where there is good training facilities, there are very good stadiums, and like you said, you can fill a stadium of 30, 40, 50,000 people that's going to pay $200. So there's a market for this stuff. You can actually make a lot of money in the US. And more, it's interesting, more and more, some of the clubs who don't even go to Asia anymore just come straight to the US, because there's a fan base and there's a ready-made infrastructure that exists in the US. There's promoters, there's the flights are shorter. So it just makes sense if you're a club, you want to go play it in the US. There's money to be made there.
I think the difference between the branding preseason and the real preseason, i.e. preparing the players for a season, for me, is captured in this very weird thing. And I don't know if anybody noticed this, but Liverpool is going to play a friendly the Sunday after our opening Saturday Premier League fixture. We're playing Fulham away as our opening Premier League fixture a week from Saturday, and then on the Sunday there's a behind closed doors friendly against Aston Villa. So what that tells me is that
this is to see if Stevie can be our next coach.
No, Stevie's not going to be our next coach. but no, I think it's the idea that you need to make everybody match fit on your squad. So you're going to play this against a team that's got a similar need. Behind closed doors, there's no fanfare, there's no fans. It's just it's not about making money. It's just about getting the players conditioning ready for the season, because that's not what happens on these preseason.
Because it's harder to have a preseason game and everybody knowing, fans, the media, that this is just a preseason game. I think I was saying to you earlier, I could be completely wrong about this, But when Arsenal was playing against Chelsea, one of the things that struck me was, and also when Real Madrid was playing, I think Club America, was the tactics of Real Madrid, the tactics of Chelsea was to play with their feet. Like, so it wasn't like Chelsea was kind of behind, but they didn't change the tactic. I mean, I'm sort of outing myself that I did watch this football. I actually did watch these games, but I did sort of watch it and go like, hold up, Real Madrid is, Club America scored first. Real Madrid is, they playing a sort of, there's no urgency. They're doing something else here. And it's harder. So the point basically I'm trying to make is like, it's harder to do that kind of prep in front of this kind of crowds and media that wants you to apparently show your competitive spirit. You know, when
they have all this ridiculous, they have a cup and they have penalties and they have all this.
Remember when Mario Balotelli made that weird penalty and everybody got upset that he didn't take it seriously? I think it was Man City was playing in the US in some preseason tournament. And remember when Balotelli took I think it was like a penalty and he wasted, or it was like a tap in and he missed it. And everybody got upset because he wasn't taking this preseason seriously. And this may be why what you're describing, you got Klopp saying, you know what, if I really want to see how my players are playing or how they could play together, I'm going to have to do it away from them.
Yeah, he's going to give, the players who don't play in that opening league game a run out so that they're actually getting match fit. Yeah.
But on the other hand, this is also, like we said before, I mean, it's good if I'm not hating on the fan who goes to these games. I have to say I went to see Arsenal one time play Red Bulls in the Red Bull Arena. I think Thierry Henry was playing. Another time I went out, Juventus was playing Sporting, also in Red Bull Arena. Like Leo, my son, was going with me. And the promise from the promoters was that Ronaldo would be playing. Also the kids were like, Ronaldo's going to be there. The trouble was anybody could have told them at that point Ronaldo had just signed for Juventus. He hadn't even arrived in Turin. And so this expectation that he was going to play in that match was complete nonsense. So on the day, I was just like, he's not playing. And it was just they played like, their third string goalkeeper, a lot of young kids. But again, there is this understanding among, the media, the sort of the hype industry, that this is a real game. I mean, as a fan, I suppose my thing was just, it's a great outing. It's just a fun outing.
No, I went to see Liverpool Man City in 2018, I think it was, in New Jersey at the Giants Stadium. And what was interesting to me there was there were a lot of people who were not football fans, but they had come to see Mohamed Salah.
Because it's like, in the media.
A lot of them were Egyptian.
Right, because of a national association.
Yeah, he's like an icon. He's like he's our guy.
Well, the one story I read today was this guy who was from Singapore, and he said he had waited for 11 years for Liverpool. He'd never seen them live. He wouldn't be able to travel to the UK, and he was basically, after 11 years, they were coming there. He had all the tattoos, everything, Liverpool to like die on his back, and that was going to be the one time that he was going to see Liverpool. So this critique, I'm suggesting to anybody who's going to watch this is not a kind of, we're not belittling that fan. We're not saying it's wrong to go to these games. We're just saying that the hype of the way these games are hyped is to make them seem more than what they really are. When in fact, they mostly, because of the nature of global football now, they're about making money.
Yeah, I mean, they're like a step up, but not hugely from when, Barcelona signs a new player and then they make them go out on the pitch and do keepy uppy for the camera.
I have to be honest, though. I think that stuff is fun, though. Did you see this one where Dybala was invited he was introduced to Roma fans, and he sits on this sort of like a slope. I don't know if he's sitting on top of a building, and then there's like a crowd of lights in front of him, and the Roma had arranged for these fans to welcome him. So I know you're making fun of the Barcelona thing, but I sort of like that idea of, well, remember Maradona when he arrives at Napoli with a full stadium, this incredible devotion to the star. Maybe because the football that I think we're familiar with didn't come with that cultural thing as part of it.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that that kind of thing.
Yeah,
In any
genres.
case, I think we've gotten to the end, and to the end of today's. We'll I don't know, what do we usually say at the end?
What do we say at the end? We say
We gotta come up with something. We gotta come up with
some sort of profound observation about history's pre-seasons. Was 1905 the pre-season of 1917? Or was February 1917 the pre-season of October 1917?
That's actually, maybe that's the title. We need a title. Maybe that's the title. Was February the pre-season
of October?
That's a long title. Anyway, Tony, this was great. Let's talk again next week.
All right, man.
See you, man. Take it easy.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, see you. Okay, bye. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh.
We're offline now, though, right?
There we go.
We're offline.
No, it says we're still going.